Just enough.
Yeah, I was just telling Kristen I'm going to make a slightly weird comment. So that symbol in this Babylon 5 book, that is the symbol of the Psychor, and that has the sort of telepaths in it. And that made me think of real NI DOMs. And if NI, because we're both skeptical of NI, if NI was really a thing, like, would they create an organization in order to police the people with the NI powers, because they'd be able to read people's minds? Anyhow,
From the inner thoughts I know of people who lead with INFJs and INTJs, they are freakishly in tune with stuff. One of my closest friends is INFJ, and she senses and picks up on a lot more than she says. And I think she's revealed to me maybe a little bit more than she does to other people, or than she does on a daily basis. And I think if the INTJs and INFJs of the world let that out all the time, yeah, somebody might want to police them, be freaked out by it, because it's crazy.
It's almost like, I think that it's like all intuitives are abstract, but not everyone who's abstract is intuitive. Because there are certain people where it's like in terms of Kersey, they would score as an abstract type, but I'm not seeing a lot of intuition coming off them. But maybe they're more discreet about it. I do think, though, that the NE DOMs tend to be a bit more flashy about it. Anyhow, we need to get on track. We have an ESTJ here. It's supposed to be supervising me.
What? Not in a supervisor role right now.
Have you got that predisposition? Because that was a thing that was in there was a moment in Homicide: Life on the Streets where he had Al Giardella, who is like, and he was based on a real guy, Jerry D'Addario, who was a real police officer, and actually he was like a lieutenant. He was in charge of the detectives. And my point being, I've lost it. Yes, that's it. He was in a situation where he was in a hospital, and some of the emergency people were treating the guy who was like almost like a domestic terrorist who sort of set the, and he took charge. He's not in charge of these emergency people. He says, "You see to the girl now." So it's like he's just naturally taken that like supervisor role, just that natural predisposition. And I think you've said, Kristen, like you've got that voice in your head where it's like,
oh, I do. Yeah,
you naturally want to supervise.
Oh, I do. And it's come out plenty of times. I did an escape room. This was several years ago. And the group that I was with, there's like 4 or 5 of us, was put in with an even bigger group. So there's 10, maybe 15 people. We get put in, and it's like a puzzle. You're supposed to discover and figure out how to escape out of this room. And there are some written clues, and there's also like object clues. And I let some time go by, and I don't know in my memory how much time I let it go by. Maybe it was 2 minutes, maybe it was 15, until I was like, there's no focus here. Everybody's just doing. So I just started like, okay, you keep working over there and let us know what you find. And you let us know what you find over there. Afterwards, my group of family I was with was like, you just started blurting out orders at everybody.
Well, were there any ESTPs there to like tell you where to go?
And that's something too in those situations. If somebody else comes up and starts saying something, like kind of organizing a task or people, I'm totally okay with it. But if it's not happening, I'll start doing it.
I've also heard some
stop myself.
I've also heard some an ESTP say that. I wonder if that's a trait common to all. Although some of them could get competitive about it, where like they want to be the one I suppose it. arguably it could be a level of development thing, or maybe an Enneagram 7, Enneagram 8 thing. So, for example, I'm thinking an Enneagram 7 ESTP or a 6 ESTP might not care. I think from their point of view, it's like, I need to take charge because nobody else will. And if somebody else takes charge, as long as that person that's taking charge is not cramping their style, I don't think that ESTP would care. But I think there's those with an 8, and just those who are naturally competitive. If someone took charge, they might want to take just because it becomes a competitive thing. And so, and that's one of the things in the Linda Bowen's interaction styles where I was thinking about, because she describes ENFJ, there's one from each temperament, ENFJ, ENTJ, ESTP, and ESTJ as in charge. And that made me think, hang on a minute, 3 of those are EJ, and I can understand why the EJs, those particular 3 EJs would want to organize people. And because that fits in with the Janus. But why would ESTP want to organize people when they're a P preference? Like, you know what I mean? Because like you are actively organizing when they don't like to organize.
Yeah, and I've seen ESTPs do that. Now they also have like, they don't, I think overall my experience with ESTPs is they don't want to be controlled or told what to do.
Yep.
Especially not micromanaged. They seem to be okay with macro level stuff if it's like trying to hit like a target or a goal, or just looking for some kind of, like, it could even be like a relationship outcome of like if you're trying to plan a trip together. But I have seen them step up in ambiguous situations, especially social. I'm not sure what the root of that is for them.
Yeah, it might just
I
be
can
like
see them being
reading the situation, and it might be, okay, someone needs to take charge of this.
And they have the people skills to do it, and usually to do it kind of like tactfully, where people don't feel like they're being told what to do.
They can have the people skills. I mean, there's a lot of instances of particular gifted people in sports, and it's usually men, where they're members of a team and they can be really talented players, but they just get thrown out of the team just because they're so disruptive. You might have like maybe an American football player like T.O. Was it Terrell Owens, or maybe someone like Michael Irvin had a reputation, or in cricket, someone called Kevin Peterson was like thrown out of 4 dressing rooms out of 4 teams because of, and so they can have a lot of people skills, because you get a lot of, and I mention it in the recent video, you can get a lot of ESTP presidents. I mean, at the last lot, I think Obama ENTP. So George Bush Jr. and Trump ESTP. I agree with Jeff about do you think Biden's ESTP?
I don't know. I don't follow, like, when you're mentioning all these sports figures and politics. I mean, I'm
getting on a bit, Christen. I'll let that out. Like some of the people I mentioned in sport, it's like, Ben, that was 20 years ago.
I don't like. I look into stuff enough to be able to vote when they come up for vote, and that's it. I don't follow from day to day, so I can.
Yeah. So you're supposed to be doing ESTJ, and so let's go on to some slides. Right. Yeah. So I mentioned this guy, like, because like fan favorite of mine, Yuri Gatan, was this like, I could ask you about that. Jonathan. Yes, that's interestingly enough. That's but you see, the thing is though, like a lot of times though, before he was Sleepy Joe, he was Creepy Joe. So anyhow, I don't wish to get cancelled. So Christen, is this part of you as well? liberal management methods are usually ineffective. Is there a part of you that's like that?
No. And I think this stems from, because I have not worked in a very structured environment, like a large corporation that has very defined roles. I've like either consulted for small businesses or been part of a small business where it's like, if you're one of 3 to 10 team members for a team, there's no micromanaging or, everybody really checking up on each other's timelines. Like it's kind of a liberal style of things just need to get done, so you just do them.
I think in this instance where it's like, because it's like this is in a tank factory in Russia, and it's like you're going to have a lot of like STs in there. You're going to have a lot of artisans. Most of the people working there are going to be artisans, and most mechanics, like a high percentage of mechanics, are going to be STPs. And so in that environment, it's going to be people the ESTJs are going to be stereotypically ESTJ.
Now I agree with this if it comes to self-management. Like if somebody's just chronically not getting things, like not accomplishing anything they say they're going to accomplish or that they express they want to accomplish, then my head's like, okay, what's missing there? Like, do you track your stuff on a calendar? Do you have a notebook? Do you use your phone? Like how, like, do you have any way that you're managing your own, whatever it is that's on their plate?
That's why recently I thought about, because I've been sort of upgrading the definitions of the subfunctions. It's like, because before it was like, people might think, Ben, that's not even beta standard. It's like alpha standard. Alpha as in like not good, because it's like alpha software. That's one of the few instances where alpha is a not good alpha. And so now it's more like beta status. But I thought about this bit about assertive SI. And it might be like that on yourself, where you turn it on. And I was thinking, is self-discipline assertive SI?
I think that's like a theme in my life, I know, is a self-discipline. And that's the way I think I'm judgmental of others, is if it seems like they don't have self-discipline. So it's not always like you're doing it the wrong way. It's like if I start asking questions about like, why'd you do it that way? Or how do you think it should be done? And there doesn't seem to be any explanation or rhyme or reason, and it's not working out. That's when I'm like, okay, there's no discipline in this. This person's just all whiffy-waffly, just doing whatever and not getting any outcome from it. So,
and you'll have a little bit of extra with that E1. A little bit of extra judginess.
Yep. Yeah, I do.
So this is not the subfunctions. This is the although it is part of the model. So if we do slot by slot, so that's nothing controversial here, I suppose. Lead function TE. I suppose what's part of this is the idea of I suppose this bit. The idea of some sort of organizing principles of. So for me, now of course with this being a concrete type, there's a difference between the club and the temperament. So whilst I bang on about clubs a lot, I think that the temperament differences are so important that it sort of overrides that. So for example, when I was talking in the so it's almost like, so for example, when we compare SI and SE, because they're fundamentally different in that you've got SI, which is like where you've got this small c conservative nature to SI, the seeking of security, the going toward the tried and the true, and that being the instinct, and that being sort of diametrically opposite to SE, going for excitement and stimulation. Those two being so different that when it comes to say like the opposite, like how much say ESTJ uses SE and how much ESTJ uses SI. Well, I need to put the slot on for SE. So for example, so I will sort of adapt my model based on, like, I always go to, like, if anything contradicts temperament, I'll go to temperament first. But with the sub-functions, it enables me a little bit of wiggle room. So for example, so I can say third strongest function in ESTJ is SE. But obviously that part of SE that is about seeking excitement and stimulation and just sort of improvising, well, that's really not going to come out so much in you, Christen, or in ESTJ, because it's like that's diametrically opposed to the temperament. And so then I can look at which features of SE are not diametrically opposed to that. And I would say, well, the ability to, like, you know, immerse yourself in the present context, to really direct your attention outwards, you know, be focused, and situational awareness. And I would also say that part of sometimes I don't think it's right to, like, take a particular trait and put it in a box and label it as a particular function. So for example, something like get up and go or drive. It's not, you know what I mean? It's like, do we really, it's not quite to put it in the box as, oh, we're going to put that in the box and label that as TE. Put that in the box and label it as SE. It's like, it's not quite, it's almost like, we could argue that I think all the extroverting functions have drive, a different kind of drive. Like for the NE Dom, it's like the drive to chase that possibility. And you can see in the way that person acts, a different kind of drive.
Yeah, like this description, the beginning of SE doesn't resonate with me. Stimulation and attention. Immersing in the present context is not something I'd say until the last couple of years. I realized that like I do it and I need it. It's only in not getting it at times. Like if I'm working from home and I'm in my apartment for days at a time, like, and it might be like maybe up to 2 days, which for me is a very long time to not even step foot outside, like see a squirrel running around. And that, like, walking around and just like seeing stuff and actually observing what's happening in the present moment, like I might, especially if I just walk out of the apartment real quick, I might not be dressed quite right, so I'm a little too chilly or a little too warm, and I start noticing just like all these little things is good, because when I don't get it for a few days, then it's like, I don't know, I just start feeling like wonky. And I couldn't put my finger on it though and tell you like that I really need that or I super enjoy it or anything like that. And the situational awareness, yes. I think in some forums and maybe even some books, ESTJs are, I don't know, can get poked fun of for being completely oblivious.
Where was that? Is that some kind of Socionics forum or something? Or
I don't know, maybe like about reading people or about, you know, I'm not sure. But I do think situational awareness, though, is something that I just like personally think I have more than average. I would say the NJs are definitely ahead of me on that for sure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe I think there's a great quote from NLP. This is on topic, where he says, "Your focus determines your reality," and it's each function, or at least we can say the type at the whole level that we will classify as this person's like a TE dom, an FE dom, an NE dom, an SE dom. They all have a different focus of attention. And so when we say situational awareness, maybe we could say an ESFJ or ENFJ has got very good FE situational awareness because that's what they're focused on.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with TE. So for instance, your situational awareness, say you're in a business, you're aware of the processes, you're aware of all the TE stuff going on, because that's your focus of attention. And maybe with the NE, their attention is directed towards new ideas, exciting possibilities. So it's that sort of way to think about it, I believe, in terms of focus of attention. Because you can have, for example, an ESTP in a social situation where all of the empirical sensory data they can be very aware of, but the certain feeling things where stereotypically the wife might, what? Why are you being so insensitive? And it's like, even though they're super sensitive to the sensory stuff, they can be insensitive to the things that they don't care about because it's not a focus of their attention.
Mm-hmm.
So what go on.
And some of the types too are just like really heady. So, just like in their thoughts a lot. So I think that's where the situational awareness can drop down. And I think just being an extroverted type, I've always got some interest in knowing like what's happening in the room or the surroundings around me for the potentiality of engaging in it.
So it might be with a type like with INFJ that when they're around other people, they can probably seem more situationally aware than the other IN types because that's part of FE. I'm going to put my attention on other people. Whereas on their own, they're probably going to be just as oblivious as the other IN types. Because especially like the INTs, I mean, like INTP has a little bit of FE, but if that INTP is like bored by the conversation, it's like I'm not going to be paying attention. Like if the conversation is, they're just an INTJ is just like, first of all, why is INTJ even there? Because it's like there's got to be a reason for them to be there. But yeah, so it's like, yeah. So I love that quote: "Your focus determines your reality," and and the reality is going to be different. But I think with this model that there's no real reason to sort of cover like slots 1 and 2 because it's like nearly every model will have ESTJ, TE, SI, and then it's just about where the other ones are. So in terms of the organizing principle, it's what I find interesting. I try to be honest. I try to be intellectually honest in that in this model, I've made a big deal about default, say, extroverting in the extrovert, situational introverting view. But I'm not sort of like, right, I'm going to make this the main feature of the model. It's like the most important, because for Jung, the most important cut was, and he grouped them, it was extrovert, introvert. And for him, that was the biggest difference between the types. And for Kersey, it was, well, initially it was abstract concrete. But by the time he got to personology, it was cooperative utilitarian. It was like his big cut because that was about actions. And because personology was a redo of Brains and Careers, and Brains and Careers, just by its very title, very human resources. And so it has a sort of a bias towards it, that book. Anyhow, so in terms of the first cut, yeah, so that's what I was saying. So for me, it's temperament, then club, then valued, unvalued, then it's default situational. And so in terms of ranking the functions, so for you, all your ST functions would be in the top 4. And then
even TI.
Even TI. Hang on a minute,
Okay.
Christen. How about your ability to take, say, the idea of social benefit rings and to apply it? You've made use of a theory. And you've handed it over to TE, but to use the metaphor, it's like your TI can talk to your TE. It's like, hey, I've come across this interesting theory, TE. Can you make some use of it?
Yeah. I don't know how to classify that as a function.
Yeah, it can be tricky.
If there's something useful in one situation, why can it not be maybe used in another situation? Because that's like, throughout history, kind of something we've done is it's like, oh, okay, this works for making rulers. Will it also have any kind of application to growing a plant, or vice versa, actually, usually? But
yeah, so yeah, I can see that with you because I think you've got extra NE, and so so it's like, and TE with NE can look a little bit like TI, because but what I'm sort of thinking is that
actually, when I'm thinking, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, I'll just say a little bit about how I think about the way TI operates in you. So you got into, I mean, it's like presumably you were interested in how did you, because let's sort of like get this in the correct order. What got you into socionics, Christen?
I was actually going to, one, I had an INTJ dad who got into all this personality stuff. So that's how I knew about socionics. But how I got to applying social benefit rings to teaching was what I was just going through in my head and had an aha moment. I was in college and found out that a lot of my peers had a terrible time in early, their primary and secondary school years. And I was shocked because I'm the kind of person that's designed for it. It was easy for me. So then I'm in university and hearing all these people had a hard time. And I'm like, why? What? And I just start listening to more and more of their stories about how bad the school system structure was for them. And then it just became this point of intense curiosity of like, well, how could it be better? Like, how could it be any different? And by just constantly then having my ears perked open for it, that's where finding the socionics benefit rings popped up as oh, this is something that has structure, but is like flexible.
Right. So I was also thinking that the way I interpret it is, it's quite ironic to me, is that you've got socionics, which is a system which is so subjective and so much TI, and yet it continually talks about how TI is objective. It's like socionics people, you should be able to see your own sort of like premises and stuff that you've got built in here.
Oh my gosh. I remember, I don't know, 15 plus years ago, maybe 20, when I was in forums, probably 20 years ago, was about socionics and saw the same thing. Like, TI is objective, TI is objective. I was like, no, it's not. Like, this is such a tight little box.
That's the thing. And it reminds me of sort of like 18th century German philosophers who would have their theory, and they called it German idealism. And it's like, these were like people that I call like TI bigots, where it's like, what I think is the objective truth. And they would call it like rationalism, to such an extent that Immanuel Kant wrote a book called A Critique of Pure Reason. And it's almost like you've got an INTP there. It's like a critique of bad TI use or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sort of the impression I get. And there's a few things in Jung which, because I do take two Jungian concepts And it was like, wow, that's really true. And it's like, now I first had that experience when I read Robert McKee's book Story. But like me being utilitarian, I was like, I got up to about page 100 before I went, damn it, you're right. Because this was all about principles of writing stories. And when he got onto his, and when he was talking about the gap between, now this is relevant, the gap between expectation and result, because it goes to that thing of the empirical and the subjective. So, for example, a character acts in the world with a sort of a subjective understanding of how the world works. And this might be a silly question. Have you seen Empire Strikes Back?
Mm-mm.
Oh my
Or
gosh.
wait, maybe I
Star
have.
Wars, Empire
I've
Strikes
seen
Back.
all the Star Wars movies. That's why I stuck. Okay, one, I'm not going to recognize it by title. But then my second thought there was I've seen, I think, almost all the movies.
Right, okay. Who's Luke Skywalker's dad?
Is it Darth Vader?
Right, okay. No
Yeah,
spoiler for
yeah.
you. But
Okay.
so this is an example of the gap, and this actually goes in towards this principle of empirical and subjective, which is pretty much what Jung meant. I mean, when he described introversion, like he even used the word subjective, 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 subjective. Like, but when he talked about object, he meant empirical because, and also because you know that word objective, but in the way he described it, he meant empirical, and also when Jung talks about objects, I was almost saying to Cole, what if it's sound, Cole? You need to say stimulus, not object. So anyway, the empirical and the subjective, that sort of idea of is sort of like the big dividing line for say, and it matching the human experience. Now, getting back to McKee, so the example of a gap, so it's gap between expectation and result, and McKee wrote gap between the objective realm and the subjective realm, but let's call it the empirical realm and the subjective realm. And so they set the situation up. Empire Strikes Back. Luke says, "Look, I've got to go and rescue my friends," and Yoda is saying, "It's a trap. You're gonna get Vader's gonna kill you." And most people, and from the audience's point of view, when you see the hero and the hero goes to fight the villain, 99.9% of the time, the hero defeats the villain. I mean, I think it literally is like that. I would say like 99.9. Like 999 times out of 1,000, the hero defeats the villain. That he goes to, and like Darth Vader's like just beating the heck out of him, cuts his hand off. He's defeated Luke. And he says, Obi-Wan never told you who your father was. No, he told me you killed him. No, Luke, I am your father. So, first of all, that is a big surprise for the audience and the character. So, the internal world of Luke is, okay, I'm going to beat Darth Vader. That's like your subjective world. I think I can do this. I'm the man. I can't act very well, but I'm getting a bit meta now. But
you're fine. Just go to the objective view.
Right. And then, but the objective,
yeah, the objective, audience's point of view, or this.
Okay. Well, this is the clever bit. It's like the audiences are viewing it through the protagonist. So as the protagonist sees that gap, and it's like, oh, cut my hand up. This world is not the world I thought it was. This is the world in which Darth Vader's my dad, and now he's offering me a job to run the galaxy with him and defeat the Emperor. So it's like these gaps between how you think the world is and what the world really is. That is like everyone's experience in the whole world. Everyone's sort of subjective experience. How they think everything is, the subjective factor versus what the world actually is. And then Carl Jung had that similar idea. And also, he was heavily influenced by Kant. And Kant had this idea of the noumenon and the phenomenon, which is like what you see is not the thing in itself. And I recently read a book, Cinematography by Blaine Brown, and he was saying that the eye sees light logarithmically. And so meaning that something that is twice as bright, we only see it as like 18% brighter. And so we're not actually, because if you've got a light meter out there, it doesn't look the way we see it because our eyesight is logarithmic when it comes to lighting. So it really compresses the brightness range. And so what we see is not what is. And so that was a powerful, and then Jung saying thinking, where you've got this empirical thinking and then it's got subjective, and it just reminds me, it just has that ring of truth about it, and it explains why people can communicate. That's the empirical part, but that subjective part explains why people have misunderstandings, how something can get lost through translation, and just how people understand a word slightly differently. So for example, Wojtek and I have a different understanding of the word empathy. My definition of empathy is more FI based, and his is more FE based. But when we say the word empathy to each other, we have a rough idea of what we mean. It's not like when he says empathy, I think car. You know what I mean? It's roughly in the same ballpark, enough that we can understand each other. But there's always going to be those differences. And so this subjective and empirical, I thought that is a powerful idea, and it reflects the human experience. And then also, I remember reading a book. Now, this book can only really be properly understood after reading McKee. It was called Aristotle's Poetics, and it was an analysis of Greek tragedy. And there it was talking about the recognition of the tragic mistake by the Greek hero. And in these, some story like Oedipus Rex. Do you know about the story of Oedipus, Christen?
You'd have to remind me.
Okay. I actually did a joke about this, but I have to tell you the story.
When you were mentioning,
yeah, but anyway, the empirical subject. Thanks for supervising.
Yeah, the empirical subjective. That is, I think, a reminder that like everybody constantly needs is we all have our subjective definitions or versions of what happened or ideas of where we think we're going. Yeah. And like we can talk and line up then on empirical stuff, but we still end up going back to our own subjective, or I should say like our subjective point of views always underline everything.
Yeah. And it helps to explain. So for example, Socionics doesn't have that. It has information dichotomies. And this one drives me crazy, and it makes me think that no wonder the Russian Academy of Sciences classified Socionics as pseudoscience. And that is this, because this thing of empirical and subjective, Socionics doesn't have this. As far as Socionics is concerned, at least the information Socionics people, the Model A people, sensing and thinking are external and don't need to be reinterpreted, and intuiting and feeling are internal. And the way Jack from World Socionics describes it is he describes it as sensing and thinking are empirical. So it's like, hang on a minute, what you're saying there, Jack, is that thinking and sensing have no subjective aspect to them. And I'm like, do you not know how language works? Like,
or have you never, been a part of a group and it's like you all had some shared experience, but you all describe it differently? Like, were you not just all sensing nearly the same thing, but you walk away with something totally different out of it?
Yeah, and it's just like the idea of or in a theory of different audience members can watch the same program and read it completely differently. And there's just the way, and that it goes, and there's a whole branch of, it's called semiotics, which is about studying this stuff, that it's about signs and symbols and indexes. And that if you say thinking is external, it's like, and that's where you get this problem with Socionics saying thinking is objective. And it's like, that's like, it never needs to be reinterpreted. There's never anyone who can get it right. It's TI propaganda. And it's like, we know thinking can be, and it's like, also, just because something is internally consistent, it doesn't make it true. And I don't think it's a useful way to divide the world by saying thinking and sensing are completely objective. And it's like, but I can also disprove that. You can have two women look at the same guy, and one woman goes, wow, he's gorgeous. And then the other woman says, are you crazy? They have a different subjective experience of what they're seeing.
Yeah. And for like symbols and language too, like that's not universal. It is like the definition of culture, that culture is building shared definitions and symbols and shortcuts. And that can be like within the MBTI community, within the country of the US, within a part of your town. Like there's, cultures have different layers and meanings. And so there's subjectivity within a group, there's subjectivity within an individual. And then there is the empirical, way of viewing things. And everything, I would say, has those two layers.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that idea,
pretty much every realm,
it matches
has both of those layers. Yeah.
And I think that's a good way of describing the human experience, that it worked in the context of story. Oh yeah, so the thing was with Greek tragedy was that we're trying to show that the Greek tragic hero, unlike the gods, does not have omnipotent knowledge. And because he doesn't have and it was a man in all of these stories, because he doesn't have omnipotent knowledge, that is why he makes the tragic error. And in the case of Oedipus, it was like his mom gets cast adrift when he was a child, and he eventually meets this woman and he marries this woman that turns out to be this, like, so I then did a gag where this was cut from the stage play about one was saying Oedipus didn't decide to sleep with his mum. He decided to sleep with some hot cougar who eventually turned out to be his mum, because I had to realize, well, she's got to be like 20 years older than him.
Yeah. And that, to that point, that note,
because it was about choices made in ignorance. And
that point you just made about point of view is something that I think as humans we do to each other too much. Like, because like, if information somebody else doesn't, right? Like they're acting out of their reality, their knowledge, their feelings, their experience, and it makes perfect sense to them.
Yeah.
But to an outsider, like you said with Oedipus, it's like, to him it made perfect sense. But to an outsider looking in, it's like, what?
Yeah, because
how could you?
Because and that bit in the routine was about Wilma. She wrote a bit about choices being made in ignorance, because she was talking about ignorant voters, and then the ignorant voters are like Oedipus, and it's like, right. But again, so this bit here about, do you agree that like these parts of the functions are empirical?
What do you mean? What do you mean by parts of it? Which part?
Like the bits I mentioned here in black. I'll let you take it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They're empirical if they're shared.
Well, it's like
there's also a subjective layer.
Yeah, like with social customs, like you could like look in books, you could like do some research on it, like you could sort of statistically prove it. You know what I mean? Like you could sort of do that, like to a sort of a high degree of confidence. It might be dated, like you could get all the anthropologists there, like at this particular time, these are the social customs, at least in this maybe subculture. And you've traveled.
How are you defining empirical for this?
Well, in that, so.
Well, up front though, your like descriptions of the functions themselves make sense. It's And I'd say too, overall, I mean, all those extroverted functions are, let's see, kind of like observable from the
Yeah.
outside looking in.
Yeah, that's sort of what I mean by empirical: observable, hearable, those sort of, and like, so for example, those FE things, those social customs, like you could like, it's a way of, like, you could sort of falsify it. Like you could say, you could ask like 1,000 people in the South, is this a custom? And you might get like 90%. Okay, that's the thing. Like this is considered rude. This is like, so it's like you can sort of say we've got enough of a sample size. This is like an empirical thing. And in terms of the facial expressions, Paul Ekman did this. Like he went to tribes that had no contact with any other cultures, and they had the same facial expressions as other people.
Yeah.
And so it's like that is empirical. Like, so that part, and then he distinguished it from a gesture which is culturally specific. So for example, in South America, if you do this for like, okay, you're all right as long as you don't do it in Brazil. In Brazil, that is extremely rude. Because I remember in one of those, there used to be a series of adverts on HSBC, and it was about cultural differences. And about like what is acceptable in one culture is like very offensive in another. Yeah,
I studied that in university for like psychology, sociology, and then getting into marketing and communications. That was covered pretty extensively. The different gestures, but that facial expressions and tone are genuinely a human experience versus learned culture behaviors.
And that would, and you'd also probably get that empirical subjective aspect when you studied communication, like where the sign is empirical, but the reading of it can be subjective. And also like sensory description in a novel, like you could do this with maybe with children, ask them to read a passage and then to describe what's going on. And it's like they might describe, or it might be like they say blue, but someone might imagine a slightly different shade of blue. It's like there's not all of the meaning is transferred across. Or I want to give that example. I think there's an example in this NLP
really
book.
interesting.
Go on, Christen. You give us a good one.
Because I have kids read passages and ask them what they got out of it, what they think about it. What do you think about what you just read? Some of them, it reveals a lot about their personalities. Some of them are very in tune with like, oh, this character's probably feeling this way or that way. Or they have a judgment like, oh, this character's really nice or a jerk. Or they just directly tell the facts of what happened. Other students start predicting what's going to happen next. They just go hypothetical in their head, like, don't even answer my question. Can you summarize? Because sometimes it's direct. I ask more directly to summarize what they just read, and they'll go into their own theory about where the rest of the story is going. And other kids give very detailed, like line by line of everything that they read. The responses to that are very interesting.
I think there's some truth in this, what Sabrina brings up there. Yeah, that's facial action coding system.
Oh,
that's true. That some facial expressions become gestures as well. Yeah. But yes, there's a bit of
the six basic emotions that are, I think, have been found to be universal across cultures and ages.
Oh, this would be a slight digression, but I can slightly describe. I've done it in another video where I mentioned there's something in a comics book artist, Scott McCloud, and I think it's probably an INTP because like he did an INTP analysis of comics, like, and he went to town on it and all theoretical on it, and I'm like, you're probably an INTP. And then I found out he wrote a book called Zot, and he actually used Jungian ideas in this comic book, and he came up with 4 different personality types. He just like did feeling, thinking, intuiting, sensing. in that. But the thing is, he described facial expressions, and the interesting thing is that he showed how when the artist draws particular facial expressions, they're combinations of the 6 basic ones. And then that made me think, when Vanderhoop said that a feeling can be a combination of mixed emotions, is that like a physical correlate of this feeling being a combination of like 2 or more other emotions? I thought, maybe that could be tested, something like that. But an example of subjective and empirical in terms of language, I'm just gonna slightly change this so that oh, that's not right. Yeah, that one, because I can. Okay. There's a bit here about how people read the word different. So if you read that out, please, Christen, from the bit where it says criteria
are vague and can be interpreted very differently by other people. I remember a good example from a couple I know well. For her, competence meant that she had actually done some tasks successfully. It was simply descriptive and not a highly valued criterion. For him, competence meant the feeling that he could do a task if he put his mind to it. Feeling competent in this way gave him self-esteem, and it was highly valued. When she called him incompetent, he got very upset until he understood what she actually meant. Yeah, how different people see the criterion of male and female attractiveness is the force that makes the world go round. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's an example of where I would say there's an example of thought, well, at least via language, of it's like it doesn't completely transfer across. And so
and that'll be different person to person, like what they think competence is or empathy. Yeah. It's also just based on their own, like beyond personality type, like their experiences, their culture, like all the layers.
Yeah, and also probably in communication, it's like, and then the context is modifying. So sometimes in a conversation, you'll probably, maybe a student study or even an adult, where they'll use a word in the wrong way. And it's like from the context, you can work out, oh, that word doesn't mean that, but I can tell from this context what you actually mean by that word.
Yeah. And there's some people that'll keep listening through that, and there's other people that stop and correct them. And I think ESTJ is known for like stopping and correcting. Yeah.
Well, again, ITP with a little bit of FE, I'll just get to a point where leave it, Ben. Like younger Ben, like just get overly pedantic, but develop some FE. Yes, like there is some choice in there in the ability of people to affect their affect display, and especially the FE DOMs, so then into say change their affect display to what is socially acceptable, and so there you are getting a bit of you're getting modified. So here we go, flat affect, which is sometimes seen in ISTJ and INTJ.
Yeah.
Fix your flesh, right? Yeah. Yeah, and Carol Linden talks about this a lot, about she's like ENFP preferences, and she would talk about she looks her FE use. That's suggestive. Right. 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 I don't know what she was. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the bit about the South. Right.
Yeah.
So and then the subjective part, and so it's like, okay, so empirical, subjective, and so it's that sort of it. In other words, it's that sort of like think. Yes, this makes sense. Empirical and subjective, and the idea that oh yeah, and I got your bits in there, and I've got a we've got and then for the introvert, but this is still But here's the thing, though, and I'm going to be honest here. For Kersey, he didn't like the distinction between. He didn't like the introverting extroverting dichotomy. But the way he understood it was sort of slight, maybe not as Jung intended. Because in the back of Please Understand Me Too, he's got a criticism of the Jungian dichotomies, or at least the MBTI dichotomies. And he would say that because there's that part of, because he was saying that intuitives are introspective, and Jung had introverts as also introspective. And so Kersey's contention was that Jung confused introverting, or introvert, he used the word introversion with intuition, and extroversion with sensing. Now, what I would say is, like, not quite, Dave.
Those all sound like different things to me.
Yeah, and it's like
introspection.
Because we've gone through, because we've sort of gone through it, and we're able to do these sort of like mental Venn diagrams of how there's slight overlap in certain areas, but it does develop an interesting sort of like spectrum where it's like you could say the IN types are the most introspective, and then the ES types are the most sort of like world focused, and then in the middle, it's like you can sort of then, like, say for instance, when you're comparing the NE DOMs and the SI DOMs, and you can sort of say, okay, in this situation, which one of these two is most reality based? Is it the NE DOM because they're an extrovert, or is it the SI DOM because they're a concrete type? And then you sort of like have to get into it a little bit more. And it's like,
well, I have a question here, because you mentioned I'm also reading the writing a little bit as you're talking. I got maybe through the first two sentences.
I'll be quiet.
And you mentioned that model G puts in the situational role FI.
No. It's about I was comparing, because like
I said, I didn't finish reading.
Okay.
But then I heard you talking about if it was NE or SI in that spot.
Oh no, just in general, in terms of a spectrum of, I'm now talking about like what is the most reality based, the SI DOM or the NE DOM? Because we almost like putting the functions along a spectrum of that which is most reality based, which you could say is SE, because it's like the reality of the present moment. And then we could say the NI and the IN types are like the most sort of like in their own heads. And for the so it's like, if you were to observe the behavior, or like to see, so I could see, so for example, my speculation would be the SI DOM is taking the sensory data in front of them, but it's like they've got all these subjective associations with that data that colors their interpretation. And so
I definitely have that with anything where it's like there's an emotional attachment to it. It's like, so some personal situation. There are very selective things I'm remembering then when there's, and I think that's just kind of a general human thing, but especially for me, it can be like every little detail. I can do this though, the like kind of like being able to track every little detail, especially down to like what was said or where things are. And that can be where things are in like cloud-based storage, or where things are like actually in the house. And I am very accurate. I would say that is how I am more realistic, right? Like based in reality. To the point where I'll sometimes recall stuff that was quite a while back, and I'm freakishly on point about it. And I have to stop myself sometimes, like, especially with work, when it's like, oh, that's not, that's not the deadline we set, for example. It was actually this other thing. And I can remember almost verbatim what was said and when. And with everything being cloud-based the way that it is, I can usually go back in a chat and find it. I have to stop. I might find that for my own satisfaction, but I have to stop myself from bringing it up because it's not productive to get forensic that way. But it is where my head goes, is those SI. My SI is anchored in reality the great majority of time. Now I still have the kind of emotional bucket of stuff that's wonky. But my NE is like playful possibilities. I can consider something that's ridiculous, outlandish, not even possible, or would never actually be done. I can brainstorming in that manner is completely comfortable.
Right. So, because it's like Jung would have said something like, the extroverts are the most in reality and the introverts are subjective. I'm just sort of playing devil's advocate, like from like Kurz's point of view, for like from his point of view of see, the thing is, Kersey liked Jung's descriptions in 1978, but I think like he got annoyed by the MBTI people sort of like criticizing it, and it's like and even now it's like people need to read Kersey's books before they start criticizing him.
Yeah. Now, I would not say that all extroverts are subjective or in reality.
Yeah, I agree. It depends what kind of reality. Like, as in, focus determines reality.
Yeah, like I have seen some ENFJs in particular just wildly like not in tune with things that like are actually happening or happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain leader of Germany in the 1940s that Jonathan thinks was ENFJ. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, this intuitive. So this I wanted to, but just getting on the idea of the personal. Yeah. So the idea in Socionics with the personal row is because you've got like the social mission row, or eventually I called it externalities and internalities, but the externalities really was the social, and basically the idea was in Model G. I've moved on past tense, but the idea is in Model G is that for you all the introverting functions are when on your territory, they're internalities. And for me, I use the extroverting functions when I'm on my territory. So, for example, in this event, so what the SHS people would say is, Ben, you're more expressive in your event because you're on your territory. Therefore, you're using your extroverting functions. But that is narrow in the sense of saying that, I only use my extroverting functions when I'm comfortable, or you only use your introverting functions when you're comfortable. But what I'm sort of saying is, and I use the example from Vanderhoop of when he wrote about taking up horse riding again. And he said that the situation demanded that he had to pay attention to the totality of his sense experience and his reactions to it. So basically, the situation demanded that Vanderhoop, when he took up horse riding again, had to be in a state of SE. It wasn't a case of him being on his territory or him being comfortable. He had the situation demanded that function. And so that is why I say, because I was thinking about, because there's a lot of things in Socionics where it's like there's a lot of narrowness, and it's like they mistake precision for accuracy. And so a lot of their function definitions are overly precise. And so they'll say SE is force, well, it can be about force, but you're missing out these other features, and there's a narrowness there.
Yeah, they can't. I don't think any of the functions can be brought down to a word or two.
Yeah,
There
especially
might be a
SE and
general
SI.
way that they're
Yeah,
seen, but as far as how they're actually experienced or used by the person, yeah,
yeah,
there's going to be a lot of flavors there. And to your mentioning to a Vanderhoop on the horse and how the situation demanded out of him a
yeah,
function use. I think that's been an evolution through personality theories, is realizing that we have our preferences in what we do, but we
yep,
have access, like within us, we have access to different functions. And when
right,
they are super demanded and needed, we can pull them out and use them.
yep,
Your point about being comfortable seemed right to me. Like for me to use my introverted functions, especially for introverted healing, I think I've got to be comfortable to really on a conscious level, like be able to acknowledge it, use it, like let it come into play. I'm not quite sure what the right word is, but I've got to be comfortable for that
yeah,
for me to healthily utilize it.
yeah. So because the idea I use of situational can include when you're in your comfort zone parts. It's just a little bit broader and allows more situations in there. So it's like maybe
Yeah.
it's the 6 in me where I was like, I want to like, and I constantly mention, well, it might be the case, but this, like I mentioned the exceptions. I want a model that's dynamic in that it allows, because like people, like they can have atypical development, like say the INTP that becomes a counselor, they're going to have better FI,
Mm-hmm.
better people skills, or the someone like Dr. Julia becomes a neuroscientist, ESFJ preferences. That's gonna,
Yeah. I like your use of the word preferences. And another thing that comes to mind is patterns, right?
yeah,
Like there's a pattern, but they can always be broken, especially at least for moments. And I think you're familiar with Naomi Quenk. I think she has the Beside Yourselves, which is about like burst. She focuses on a very particular part, though, of people breaking their patterns, the norms for their type.
right. I think there's a phrase I picked up from Dario. Like I was like fumbling around trying to get the right expression, and then Dario said, "Oh, Ben, you mean atypical of their type?" Yes, that's it, Dario. Atypical of their
Yeah.
type. And then a few years later, I sort of came up with the expression that someone can have atypical role enactment in a typical way. And so I came up with the example of you can have an ISTJ that becomes an artist and they do it by the book. So that's
Mm-hmm.
atypical role enactment in a typical way. But conversely, you can also have different types enact the same job in a different way. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, I gave the example of the sitcom Porridge, which was set in a prison, because I might not use the term porridge in America for doing porridge meant being in prison, because they would give the prisoners porridge. Um, um, anyhow, you had a prison guard who was like typical ESTJ Mackay, but you had Barraclough, and he was all about reforming the prisoners. So I thought he could be an idealist. That's what an idealist would be like as a prison
As a prison guard.
a prison guard. They would be about reforming the prisoners.
Yeah.
So it's like if we then look closely enough, and then we can sort of look more intelligently at the interplay between the psychology and the sociology, the type and the role, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of like what are the demands of the role on the type. And it's like you can get this in writing where you can have a person who is heroic, but you can put them in a desperate situation where they end up committing acts of terrorism because they're fighting, say, an alien invasion, and that's what happened in the remake of V.
And I think a lot of I have Netflix, and a lot of the shows or movies I've watched on there in the last couple years that are newer, and I think they're Netflix productions, they start to show the complexity of characters.
I mean,
and these really hard judgment calls, kind of two that people make.
So,
And
Christen, yeah, go on.
as you start to learn the character, you learn why they're doing what they're doing, but they end up doing these things that would seem incredulous if that was the first thing you learned about them.
So I'm going to make a pitch. So I suggest that you watch Babylon 5. There's a section because he used Jungian ideas. There's a whole light about the Jungian ideas used in, and he did use Jungian ideas, and he said that Straczynski's position was he didn't necessarily agree with all of Jung's ideas, but he used some of the ideas in. So if you want, again, it took him 7 years, and he planned it all out, 110 episodes, 5 arc plots over 5 years, and he's going to remake it next year. It comes out in the remake. So if you watch it on Netflix, you can see the original version of Babylon 5 before you watch the next one, because you're going to have to wait months and months and months for all of the story elements, because the amount of foreshadowing done in it. So I can give you an example. I won't tell you what the plot twists are, but I can give you an example of foreshadowing before we then get back on track. So, for example, in the pilot episode, it's all about Sinclair. So it was 10 years after the Earth-Minbari War. Earth was just getting beaten, and Sinclair was at the Battle of the Line. He said he was about to ram a Minbari ship, and he said a light passed in front of him, and then when he woke up 24 hours later, the Minbari had surrendered. So at the point of victory, the Minbari had surrendered. Then you have things set up in the pilot. You have another alien comes in, talks to Delenn. She gets a gravity thing out and says, "Do not mention the Grey Council." Then you have in the second episode of the series, you have a soul hunter come along, and he sees Delenn. You would do such a thing, which then she does later on in the season. And then it's all this stuff with, why is a member of the Minbari Grey Council playing ambassador? You get the answer to that seasons later. And so it's all of this foreshadowing. And then even in the pilot, the Minbari says to Sinclair, "You have a hole in your mind." And that was about him having that lost 24 hours. Why did the Minbari surrender? All of this stuff, and you got all the stuff with the souls being reborn in future generations. Well, they have to. So that's a little bit redundant because there has to be a future generation in order to be reborn. But all of these plots, and then you have the Psychor, all of the stuff with this, and so with the Psychor, if you have telepathic powers, you've got 3 options. You either join the Psychor, go to prison, or you have to take medication to suppress your powers. And Ivanova's mother, she took the medication, but that it affected her mood, and she committed suicide. And so Ivanova is this Russian character, and she has these, but played with an American accent, but she has these dark lines. And anyway,
That's
get back on track.
That's a well done story, though. The way you're describing things are introduced and then layered on or revealed
big time,
seasons, years,
big, and stuff that's revealed seasons later, and all of that stuff that I was saying before with the arc, all of that stuff with the. I can't say what the name of the arc is because it might give it away.
Yeah,
but all of that
don't. I'll watch it. Once you told me how layered it is,
it's
in
wicked layered.
Episodes and seasons out. Yeah.
Remember, INTP, it's INTP layered. It's wicked layered. And I'm trying to do something similar with the Wilmer's Housemates, but on a much smaller level because zero budget. But anyway, so empirical and subjective. This is sort of related. So I've been doing this with Haley where we've been talking about NI and just how NI relates to the different functions in the you can see what you can see. I don't really want to go into it because it's not super related to but like it's a way of defining it in relation to things that we're more sure about. It's a little bit of a TI argument and a systematic argument, but it's like how NI is different from NE and SE and SI.
Yeah.
And so it's like NE being expansive and lots of different options, NI a singular option, long range option. So you can say that's how it's different from NE, and it's different from SE in terms of now and then sort of downtime and through time, and SE is the in time now. And then you can say how NI is different from SI in terms of SI is about stabilizing and continuity with the past, and NI is about development. And in all of those instances, they're opposites. So, and that and I see that at the whole type level, rather than just making stuff up. Like we know the NJs are good at planning stuff and seeing how things develop.
And the way I've heard it described by a couple NJs is that they take all of the timelines into account. The past, the now, the possible futures, the possible past that could have happened, the different things that could be happening right now, and then the different outcomes that could happen. And that the future planning for them too seems to be longer than any other type. Like for people that can really do a long game, it seems to be the NJs.
Do you think this might be a Guardian?
Let's see. Yeah, this sounds like an ESTJ or ENF or ESFJ.
SI man, or I sometimes call this SI in human
What is that
form.
last line? Hold on a minute. The only drawback is Amazon suggests. What? Okay. Yeah.
Right, SI man. And then it's like it's really cool to ship that.
Yeah.
And then you got ESTJ
Absolutely.
captain. It's like, I think it's a good name.
Yeah.
Or this.
Because if you want.
Or this literally a sign in India in a factory.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
That is like the stereotype of STJ, I think.
And then there's a bit where if I can see the model, I've done Yuri Gatan twice, but it's sort of.
I'll be 1 second. I can hear you though.
Okay. Right. Okay. So, folks, we need to. There's some bits of this model to maybe describe. Maybe what I should do is compare Model G, because Christen knows Model G quite well. And so I should look for that. Model G sociotype. So if I explanation. Is there something there with that's the whole thing. Right. So if I put that across there, we can sort of like see the difference. Right. Okay, so if I put, even though it's not TESX, I'll put TESX on there just so they're next to each other. Right, okay, you're back. So because you do know Model G.
A little bit of Model G.
I can put what I sort of said for how it's arranged differently, where for the personal. So there you go. I'll let you take that in. Interesting that he uses ride a horse. But the actual example that Van Hook gives of actually riding a horse would actually disprove this.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But it's like if you remove the rider, what does the horse do?
Yeah. I mean, it's like a lot of people. Ben, you've lost your rider at times. But
okay.
And then so it's like So it's like mine. So my model would include this because, like, being at closer psychological distance is a situation. Just like, so being comfortable is a situation. Just like an external circumstance demanding certain functions of you is another situation. And then the default is just your preferences. Oh yeah, so I got preferences. That term,
Yeah, I think
preferences.
default. I think
Yeah.
default is a good word too.
Thank you, because that's something I thought long and hard about getting the right terms. And also,
it's a default mode, but that under certain situations, whether it's your like emergency or something urgent, or you just really want to, you do it, or awareness even, I think can bring us to a point.
So when I was doing Model G, eventually my subjective factor got in. I started to play with the names, but I did actually come up with the names that were
Hungry.
within.
I don't recall.
Yeah. No,
that's
I got a little bit in there with, like, there's a couple with the hungry and the allergic.
Which function is that? Is that F5?
That was me sort of like putting it in, like, but again, for that would be for, again, it's a different model, and it's like it's all arranged with social benefit rings, and social benefit rings have utility. You have proven it. So there's something to social benefit rings. It's just that when you design a model around it, I mean, Model G has the benefit that you can see the intertype relations, like in terms of which square is next to which one. So it's useful for that. But there's a lot of complexity to it. And this is one of the big differences between my model and Victor's, is that, and this is where I had quite a difference of opinion with him, is that not in an argumentative way, but in a friendly INTP-ish way, in that this function here, whereas Victor has it 8th, but you see, the thing is, the profiles that I have from Victor doesn't make the functions in slot 8 in his model seem weakest, because it makes INTP sound like a business genius. If only it could be bothered and had the organizational skills. That's how that profile reads for TE in INTP. Because it says things like knows how to build an organization. However, frequently it does not possess the organization. So it's like they know how to do it, but can't. And yet, then what happens?
Can an INTP TE? Because I don't think I've seen
intellectually they can. They might need an assistant, and that's in Kurz's book. I love the fact that it's in Kurz's book. There's a bit where it says, if an organization is to get their most, and he uses the term architect rational or architect. If the organization is to get the most out of an architect, they need to provide him with a support staff, with an efficient support staff, in order to capture the ideas as they emerge before they lose interest and move on to another one. So
what function would that be for mine?
For you,
8?
They would say your 8 would be TI.
Okay.
But I've put it in 4th, and Dario's research is consistent with mine, because Christen, have you got Dario's book, Magic Diamond?
No.
Oh, because it's a lot of self-help stuff, and it's got some like EEG, and it's 400 pages, so it's more value for money than his previous one. So, and it's a lot of self-help stuff in there. He liberally quotes from Jung, which technically he shouldn't have, because like it's not 70 years since he died, so it's still in copyright. But I think he'll be all right, because loads of people would be sued for quoting from Jung.
Yeah, Jung is quoted everywhere.
Yeah, but I found out of copyright because he died in 1950.
So cleared just by 2 years.
Yeah. So again, so my interpretation is different from. So my interpretation is that.
What is it you would put in the weakest function slot?
I would put
in number 8
for you, NI.
Yeah.
I would do NI for you. So, and so if I go back to my model, so I've got them next to each other. So, so I put
Yeah.
TI there. And so what I should show you is now you like to be like you're a data-driven person. So
I think this is true, though, just right off the bat, that NI is, I don't know, I can't even say, I don't know what the right word is. It is one of the last tools I will pull out of my toolbox.
Right. So, and this is something from Dario's book about, it's written in a, now, if I were Dario's editor, I would suggest it to him, Dario, this is a very important part of the book, and you're making a lot of tricky, nuanced points. Can you draw people a picture with these and diagram it out a bit? Because it's like it's a little bit of a TI test. This and you have to sort of, it's like this is for people who know their MBTI stuff. So I'll give you a little bit of time to like tease it through.
Okay. I think I got the main sentence, that there's a clear pattern where the top two functions score in the top half and their opposing score in the bottom half.
Yeah. And it's just, and that thing of, because part of me in like quoting this, I didn't want to quote like all of it because I wanted people to like to get the book. That, yeah, 96% of the time, like in terms of the actual scores, those slots that I have, like 3 and 4, they're in like the top 4 of the scores anyway. So, and that's on Dario's test. And so, because this is referring, so he calls this the cognitive processes assessment, and it's about the keys to cognition.com test that was actually created to sell the book 8 Keys to Self-Leadership. And so, as we see there with the example,
which is a great book, the exercises and the assessment.
This is the follow-up. This is the follow-up, Christen.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine 15 years later. So, yeah. So it's like I sort of do it as one way to think of it is that, just so that I can plan. How much extra time do we have, Christen?
I've got like 20 or 30 minutes.
Okay.
Let's see. My difficulty with this is the suggestion, with TI being a slot ahead of NE. I don't know if that's just because my personal thing. It does seem to, or if it's just kind of a guardian thing, that it's like, as long as you clue them in, like this is playful mode or creative mode or brainstorming mode, they do seem quite capable of going into possibilities world.
Okay. When I wrote the ESFJ profile, now I've only released like an eighth of it, but as I was writing the profile and sort of working through the subfunction system, and recently I sort of was thinking about how FI and TI, and specifically when I wrote the ESFJ profile, I thought about how FI is very much affected by the guardian temperament. So the FI feelings that ESFJ would have would be like feelings of responsibility. And it's like, where are these feelings coming from? If they're not coming from the outside, it's coming from their temperament. And so what I was thinking, that if we call TI subjective thinking, and so it could be like thinking that's coming from your temperament or thinking that's colored by your temperament. Well, because it's like not everything because a lot of the stuff about a temperament is subjective. It's like the values and drivers of a temperament. It's like just coming from within. So TI in the sense.
How would you describe, especially, I think that.
Well, what I should do is I'll put on the sub-functions I have for TI, because then it might be one of those.
I'm curious about the TI assertive and the TI harmonizing, because I think my TI is likely one of those two.
Yeah, so it
But
might
I'd
be a
like to
case of, yeah, I'll let you, I'll give you time because it's a bit, yeah.
Let's see. Okay, subjective-based thinking and subjective premises, structured. Let's see.
No, I took out
Yeah, you
structural
crossed
logic.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and
structural
when
logic
it's in
or
violet, that's TI with intuition. So NTP
Mhm.
TI, and then TI with orange is artisan TI.
So use quick fixes based on specific circumstances, thinking on one's feet. Yeah, I have that ability, the one in orange.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I can do that quite readily. The TISE one. Okay, I'll keep reading though for the subfunctions. I never would have thought of TI in this way.
Is that good?
No, it's just it sounds okay, like with the TISE and then the harmonizing, it sounds very adaptable, which is not a viewpoint I've had of TI.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
I guess
because,
because those are the more artisan
yeah, because
applications.
I think it's like, because it's adapting to the present circumstances, and SE is very clued in to the present circumstances by definition, at least by Dario's definition, immersing in the present context. And we can sort of TI that, and within a sort of a system picture, we can show how that's opposite from NE, because NE is cross-contextual thinking, and SE is about now, and then that helps to explain why NE is low in SE in the SPs and why SE is low in the NPs.
Right.
That opposite there. And
Yeah.
so it's almost like you can do an argument of symmetry, but primarily I like to do an argument of, do we see this at the whole type level? And
let's see. So one thing too that comes to mind is like with the systems, like
one moment, you might do this. You might do a little bit of this integration of theories, because you have got an experience of lots of different typology theories.
Yeah, with like psychology and sociology stuff, yeah, I cross that all over. I'm just, to me, that all fits in the bucket of the human experience and analyzing it. So let's see. The under systems, though, and the strategic construction, that is probably the biggest way that I'm critical, is like systems that exist. Like, I think that is where my Enneagram 1 definitely comes in, of wanting to improve things, is to systems, like the education system, for example. But it's also inside companies, when it's like things have just emerged, but they weren't strategically constructed. That really bothers me. And I'm like, whoa, let's go back to the ground level here.
So your
What's
TI
being
might be a
done?
little bit like this in ISTJ. Improve the system, like the system, that the authorized system, like this is the authority I'm looking to, but let's make it better.
I'm actually so critical. It's like it's got to be torn all the way down and rebuilt. Improving
Yeah,
the system
I mean, I agree. If you're talking about the American education system, I agree.
Or just so many other things too. Like improve the systems, like a lot of band-aids, versus like, what if we started with a clean slate? Like how would this be built?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you're talking about education, the best way to do it is, and now we're getting political, I would say, is school choice. Because I mean, your experience and Sabrina's experience would be, there's so many different ways of teaching children, and also children vary, and we can see very much how they vary by, especially Jungian type, that they have different needs and wants. And so the best system would be the system that provides that let's not have one type, not one size fits all. Let's have something that more choice will be more choice for the students, and to help them. I would put my ESTJ hat on, and so primarily with vocational training as that a minimum for everyone, so that people aren't where you have a situation where I've listened to the Partially Examined Life. There were these guys that did philosophy at university, and they were saying, don't do a philosophy degree. And they were talking about how very few of their people on their course eventually went on to get a position as a philosophy professor, because there are so few jobs in philosophy. And because they were not thinking practically. And it's saying that you have to be like outstanding to get a job as a philosophy professor, because you've got so many people going after so few jobs in that arena. So that's just, so a lot of NTP is doing that.
Yeah, and the school choice that you mentioned too breaks some of the socioeconomic barriers that we have here that are also territorial, because that's linked to property values, tax values, how much money the school gets. So there's a lot of different layers of choice, like choice to study, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say,
and then this is where I'm going to come in with intentional pairing of teacher and students and student groups.
I would say it's I would make an antitrust case against, because when antitrust legislation, I'll do a little bit of politics, then I'll stop. When antitrust legislation first came in, they had to amend it because it could have been used against unions. And I would say there's a big antitrust case that could be used against the teachers union in the United States, because like you've got, if you look at, anyway, I don't really want to talk about I don't want to get too political.
It's a very complex system, so there's issues at like a lot of layers of it, and I see that with a lot of other systems. That's just the one that I care about. But
also, it's like you've also got a, I'll just say
there's like money systems, there's like marriage system, there's how we get our food delivered system, like and I think my TI might fall in the assertive.
I mean especially with the E1. So I'm thinking that, so there is one of the reasons I came up with the subfunction system. There's sort of two reasons why. First of all, I had 3 definitions of SI knocking around my brain since 2014, because Jung's definition, which was like subjective sensing and like, the idiosyncratic artist's vision. Then we had like the Socionics definition of SI, which was like comfort sensing. But then Kersey also mentioned something about that, because he talked about ISFJs and nursing and being a doctor. And I thought, okay, that's in Kersey. I had Jeff saying guardians will tell you about their medical problems. So it's like that. And then we have, the kind of SI that we get from Behrens, Nardi, and MBTI, which is like, do it in a certain way because of a sort of an inner small c conservatism and seeking security sort of way. And so there were those 3 definitions of SI. And then also I knew that SE was different as well, because learning about artisans from Jeff, I knew that there was the blood and guts kind of SE, because I thought, hang on a minute, socionics is just concentrating on like the warrior part of SE. It's not doing any of the kind of creative part of SE. And so, and then Victor had this system of DCNH, and what he had was, now originally I had a normalizing subfunction, but then I realized I was just sort of copying the dominant. It was just sort of copying assertive, but it was sort of less assertive. And then I thought, hang on a minute, SI is the normalizing function. There's no point having a normalizing SE. It doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. So I threw out normalizing. And then, but what Victor did differently was his premise was someone is a creative subtype if they have extra SE, NE, or FE. Now, originally he did it based on his mindset system that he calls temperament. So, for example, if you're dominant, you were like extra EJ, you had more TE or more FE. If you were creative, you were more SE or more NE. If you were more normalizing, you had more TI and more FI. If you were more harmonizing, you had more SI and NI. And then he added a third function to each one. He added SI to harmonizing, FE to creative, SE to dominant. But when I looked at that, I thought I don't like only 3 functions being seen as creative. And I thought, no, it's the other way around. Every function has got a creative one. And then I had this thinking, and then I was going back and forth about, are they creative? Then I came to SI. And I thought, well, SI, that creativity in a lot of Guardians, it tends not to be expressed. And so then I thought, okay, I'll call it the imaginative subfunction. And then I had a brainwave. Oh, wait a minute. All the introverting functions have an imaginative subfunction, but then I'll switch it to creative when it's extroverted.
Okay, I was wondering, because I noticed you had imaginative written on here.
Yeah, because it's like it's actually expressed. Whereas, like for the Guardians, a lot of Guardians won't express that S. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's internal, which imaginative gets across. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to because I was thinking about how Guardians, because the arts is not a safe career, many Guardians are going to keep their creativity sort of like not seen as easily in the professional sphere. You will get it in terms of if there's a career for a Guardian as like a technical artist, you can see them going into that field. Or if they're from a family of a long line of artists, you can sort of see it. Okay, there's a career path here. I can get a solid income from it. Then they can do it. And also, I think you know Jamie and Natalie.
Jamie, yes. Natalie, I'm not sure.
Is it true that Jamie writes poetry?
I think that's right.
Yeah. So that would be an example of an ISFJ resembler can do some, but it's like, I think they're less likely to do that as a career. They're less likely to take the risk, especially poetry. I mean, for a start, very, very hard to. It is weird to me that poetry is the least well-paid writing, but songwriting is per line is the most well-paid. So poetry is like, but songwriter, top of the tree in terms of money, because it's very rare that the actual like in movies the writer does not get the most money, but in terms of music, the person that writes the song gets more money than the singer.
Well, in songwriting, is that only the lyrics, or is that including the?
Yeah, a lot of times it's the music, and that's where I sort of like came down a bit, like because that to me that's like that would take me 10 to 15 years to learn that properly, because that is like a big proper system.
This is good though. This the TI. I would like to see more examples of the assertive and the imaginative, though.
Okay, let's try and come up with some then.
What is assertive TI like?
Well, I think it's like Socionics saying that TI is objective. That is the whole of Socionics is TI assertive.
You said that earlier, but what's another?
Just anyone who's like takes their theory and it's like, this is absolutely true because it is reason, and it's like they put their reason as I'm right, this is reason, this must be true, like those philosophers.
So like the method or system they came up with is the way.
Yeah, and you must have got that impression by the way certain people talked about Socionics.
Yeah.
Like they were really like,
yeah, big time.
because it's internally consistent, it's true. That's the impression I get.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
your real kind
That's
of
where
assertive TI.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then the imaginative?
Again, it's like, I just think speculative thought, or thinking through a plot. Like J. Michael Straczynski, like he's got a situation where he's made up a universe, and it's like, well, I've got this. Right, what would they do in this situation? Is all speculative thinking. It's like if for a writer that's made up and it's lots of different things, it's like, yes, they're going to be touching on, but it's like to create a unique world. And it's like the speculative, the hypothetical thinking. Yeah, that I put it there on the typewriter. I think a lot of the hypothetical thinking, and certain types don't like that. Oh, that I don't like. I don't answer hypothetical questions. And it's like subtext. I don't want to get trapped.
And that's so how is TI imaginative different than NE?
Yes, one of these things I've thought about.
Possibilities.
Yes, okay,
Yeah.
I've got one. I can give an example, Christen, where, because I am honest when stuff doesn't fit functions, because you know me, I'm temperament first. So, okay, so I give the example of because I give this example of how Douglas Adams came up with the infinite improbability drive, because I think it is an example of NE and TI sort of coming together. So he's written the first episode of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and he's come up with a cliffhanger, and his two sort of dual protagonists are called Ford Prefect. Now he's an alien that named himself after a car, because he thought the car was the dominant life form on Earth.
Yeah.
And Arthur Dent, and basically he's made this
What's funny is the number of people that are named Ford, like actually as a chosen first name.
Yeah.
Anyways.
So, and he's made this thing of, and he wanted to create this big. I mean, you can also see his P preference. He came up with this cliffhanger of Arthur and Ford have been thrown out into the cosmos, into cosmic space, and he's saying they're going to die within 30 seconds unless they're rescued. And so his problem was, how do I rescue them within 30 seconds of being thrown out into space? And he said that every solution he kept coming up with, the problem was every solution was highly improbable. And so, and he said that he was almost at his wit's end. He didn't know what to do. Then he happens to be watching a program on judo, and he hears the judo instructor talking about tackling a larger opponent. And the judo instructor says, you need to use the weight of your opponent against himself. And it's that. When he hears that, and this is where the NE comes in, it's like, ooh, something to that. Weight of the opponent against himself. And it's like, and then this is where I'm speculating that this is where the thinking then comes in, and where he's able to extract the key. So it's like, the thing is with a metaphor is that the relationship between the elements is the same as the thing that you're doing a metaphor of, but the elements are different. But the relationship between those elements is the same. And in terms of judo, it was use the opponent's weight against himself. But the actual relationship between those elements, almost to go bigger scale, to go upper level, to go like upper sort of semantic level, is not the weight of the opponent against himself. Douglas Adams was, via a combination of intuition and thinking, able to get to the key lesson of use the weight of the problem against itself. Use the weight of the problem against itself. And then he thought, what's my problem? Improbability. So how do I use the weight of improbability against itself? And so that is when he came up with the infinite improbability generator and the infinite improbability drive. And so because the spaceship was powered by the infinite improbability drive, he had to the owners of the ship had to rescue Ford's cousin was on that ship and he rescued it. Highly improbable. You get rescued by your cousin. And so you take the weakness and you've turned it into a positive. You've turned it on its head. But the any part, I think, was him hearing. And that's like the external stimulus. Use the weight of the opponent against himself. And then some kind of abstraction involved to go from weight of the opponent against himself to weight of the problem against himself. Weight of the problem against itself to what his problem was. And I think that's an example of any and TI.
Okay. So I heard in that the external stimulus of him with the judo instructor, and then the internal thinking process of kind of shaping the system.
Yeah, and it's like
in the storyline, or shaping the structure of the storyline.
Yeah, for me, it's like there's something to it, but as soon as it gets into words in your mind, then you're in what Van der Hoek would say the sphere of thought, because he would talk about material moving between different spheres of functions, like something can start with an intuition. So in an NF, it might move from the sphere of intuition into the sphere of feeling, and then maybe into the sphere of thinking. And it sort of shows how these sort of processes can blend together. But I like the idea, even though the word is hard for me to say, sphere, but I'm going to say globe. The globe.
Sphere.
The globe. The globe of...
The globe is a representation of the Earth.
The globe.
I know what you're talking about, though.
Yeah, the
a
globe.
3D circle.
Yeah. The globe of intuition. And then I think that it's almost like, for me, it's like there's a feeling that there's something to it. And it's like as soon as we're reasoning it through and thinking about it, then it's moved into the sphere of thought. But also because of my type, like most of everything is filtered through my thought, that it's hard for me to think outside. I can't think outside of it because it's the function I'm doing, thinking. So I only really experience, subjectively, I only really experience thinking, sensing, and FI. I experience NE when I have the connection and it pops into my mind. But then when I think about it, then you're in the sphere of thought. But then also, I would say a separate process is rational elaboration. Because, so for example, logic, I don't think it's TI or TE. Because if we use that definition of subjective and empirical, well, logic is neither empirical nor subjective. It's just logic.
Yeah.
And that helps to explain why you can have types that are feeling types that can have a wicked high logico-mathematical IQ, like 150, even though the type that they resemble has like TI all the way down. Well, that's because those two things are different.
Yeah, yeah.
But frequently related. It's just that you probably noticed that because the TPs use a lot of TI, but that TI has a helper in terms of reason. And so so in other words, the TPs train up their reasoning power. So TPs tend to, on average, have a higher logical mathematical IQ just because they're using it for their TI. It's just like, on average, assuming equal talent, SE DOMs would develop. Assuming equal hand-to-eye coordination, SE DOMs would develop it more than other types because the SE function can tend to draw on hand-to-eye coordination. But you can get examples of, say, an SE DOM that doesn't have very good hand-to-eye coordination. It's just that if they've got the skill, they've got the SE that's drawing on it.
Yeah, or if you put them in another type up on the same starting point.
Yeah.
they're more likely to naturally develop it.
Yeah. So it's that thing of, and both Dario mentioned it, and then before him, Kersey, of preference leads to practice, practice leads to skill.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right, I've got maybe just a couple minutes here. Any last
any other function you, because maybe one I did the is there any other function you'd like to see? Did I show you the TE ones?
Oh, we didn't. I think we didn't talk about FE. Might be the only one we didn't.
FE, right?
Yeah.
Now the FE ones I've not. Oh yes, I actually think this is quite strong. Oh yes, I mentioned this, that for temperament reasons, I think FE might be stronger in ESTJ than ENTJ, because ESTJ is cooperative, and as a guardian, guardians want to belong.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true. Yeah.
So that's going to be NI, and that should be okay. FI. So FE should be here. Yep. Yeah, I've not changed this one much. I don't think at all.
In which in your model, which role is this in?
I've got this as contrarian alternative.
Contrarian. Okay.
But I will sort of talk about exceptions, like there's certain functions that are more integrated. So, for example, so I think ESTJ uses FE more than ENTJ, just because of guardian versus rational. And I think that FE DOMs also, if you look at FE DOMs, they would use TE differently. So ESFJ, I think they're quite good at TE for a few reasons. One is, although TE is not preferred, ESFJ has a large energy budget. So if there's only a small percentage, but it's of a big pie of energy. And also, ESFJ in a work environment, for FE reasons, they're going to want to fit in with the work ethos. And so if the work ethos, the business atmosphere is TE, it's a TE atmosphere, ESFJ will do TE for FE reasons. So that, and then the third point is ESFJ is naturally good at logistics, or predisposed to being good at logistics.
Mm-hmm.
And so any kind of business which is about, where it's about the execution of the business, like something like Walmart, where it's like doing the simple things very well, small margins, that kind of logistics, ESFJ is going to do that kind of TE well, because also it's going to be TE that's paired up with SI, and they've already have strong SI. But if it's the kind of like strategic planning kind of TE, this kind of planning that NTJs are better at, then that kind of TE ESFJ would be weaker at, because that also draws an NI, which is a weak function for ESFJ. So I can sort of explain it like that. I also think Enneagram is a big factor. So for me, a 6, because a 6 worries and has anxiety, I think I have more access to FI than, say, a 5. An INTP 5 is more like cut off from their feelings, I suppose. And so, and also my trifix there, I mean, 6, 4, 1. Like the FI with the 1. Like, and then the 4. Like, I mean, 4 is very FI. Like, I mean, all the Enneagram 4s, they're like, it's like pretty much, I mean, it's either NF and ISFP, that's it. No one else could be a 4. Pretty much. NF, and even Jonathan's like, he doesn't even really like the ENFJ and ENFP to be a 4. But he might just allow it because they're NFs. Because he's like INFP, INFJ, ISFP. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a strong correlation, I think, with the fours and their MBTI.
Yeah, and so maybe the now
So what is how do you define the contrarian alternative?
Okay, so I tried to. So this is something I sort of got because when I did Model G, I was banging on all the while about how important the role function was. And so, and now I'm like, I don't really want to like contradict myself. So it's like I'm a little bit torn because the data says that it's low, but in myself, I see quite high FI, and so in fact, Socionics has FE ahead of the tertiary. I mean, for in Model G, it does. But it has this weird thing of splitting it between energy and information, where it will say that tertiary has more information, but less energy. So, but it's one of these things where it depends. So what it might be is, you know, when I went before, when I showed the irrational functions and how different they were from each other and how they were actual opposites, this might be a thing. I don't think that these rational functions are actually opposites. I don't think that thinking and thinking are opposites. Thinking and feeling are opposites. Because frequently they're combined.
I think that too. I can especially see it with TE and FE.
FE in business.
Yeah, well, and if I want to TE, like especially TE other people, I've got to have some FE skills pulled in. Otherwise, you know, me trying to, you know, kind of sergeant somebody around is not going to work.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get any, and nothing's going to happen. Resistance actually will happen.
Yeah. So, for example, CBT sort of clued me in onto this a little bit, where so for example, CBT talks about your thinking can change your feeling and your feeling can change your thinking, and it has like literally thousands of case studies of how thinking and feeling interact with each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Which makes sense for you too, then, with TI and FI.
Yeah, I think with the six and like the ambivalence and that lot, but also there's a point that Vanderhoot made about how thinking and feeling are opposite. And this is one of these like really nice sort of like INTP-ish points. And he said something like, it is the impersonal objectivity at which thinking aims that feeling objects to. I think that's right. But you see, thinking doesn't always aim at impersonal objectivity. So it's the impersonal objectivity that's the opposite of feeling, not thinking in itself. Because you can have someone in a soliloquy thinking about their feelings, or you've got a counselor there and they're thinking about the feelings of the person. Well, it's not actual opposites. So impersonal objectivity would be no feeling and just thinking. So it's only in special circumstances. So like I said, when Vanderhoot said it's the impersonal objectivity at which thinking aims, what I would say is the impersonal objectivity at which thinking sometimes aims. And that,
or can appear to aim.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's an outside perception that thinking is not taking into consideration.
Yeah. Because you know what I mean? Like, because sometimes you can use feeling and thinking together. Whereas now, whether it's now, it might be the case that, well, everyone knows that thinking and feeling exists, but those other functions, someone could argue this. Someone could argue, oh, the reason why you can get them into neat opposites, Ben, is that INTP has made it up. So you can define it deliberately like that by making them into neat opposites. But what we could say is, but when we look at Kersey types, that's not been created using functions, we see it. We see the MP as like in lots of different options and tangenting all over the place. We see the NJ as being focused on like as being able the ability to like go down one path. And we see it at the whole type level. So we get these opposites here, but I can't really do the same for the judging functions. I can't say how TI is opposite from the other ones in quite as clear a way. I can do maybe a little bit with, say, FE versus TI and FI versus TE. I can do it a little bit as to how they're opposite.
They work together so much. I think
sometimes they do, yeah.
Even as you have SI and NE listed here as tandem use, and then SE and I.
Yeah, and also that example, remember when I gave you that theory of mine about how guardians use NE, where they will look at a situation and then make a connection to their locker full of techniques.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's a little bit of SI and NE sort of working together.
Yes.
There.
And I think too about the development of them, and this is kind of like what John Beebe tapped into when he was looking at Jung, talking about the types using our top two functions and the third not coming at all, but then, over time, I think around the 70s or 80s, we started to, there's the point of view that you could develop your third function came in. And when I think about that with ESTJ or maybe any of the guardians to being able to develop NE, it's that at that coming later in life, the possible development of NE is after building up a bigger SI bucket, because you have more experiences then to draw on to help activate the NE, that there are more possibilities other than what's now. I like that verbiage that you have there, an alternative to now. I'm not sure that that's possible for a guardian really young, early on in life, like at age 5, 10, 15. Because I think that SI bucket needs to build up in order for NE to have more to play with and to start stepping more and more outside of what's known and what already exists.
Yeah, I think we see it more maybe in ESFJ, because I think they'll use their NE to entertain, like for FE reasons, like to like be humorous. Whereas sort of like ESTJ isn't motivated as much to show their NE. But more so it's like in a business context, someone could see the way you operate, Christen, and say, oh, if they knew typology, you can see how she's using NE here. Oh, we have Persona Bell. Yeah, here we go. There's
having feelings about
yeah. It's like they're not
exchange, yeah,
they're not sort of like opposite by definition. Whereas the way that so FE and TI can be opposite in a way that, so for example, it is true that all those types with IT in their code, like it's when they're younger, they tend to have like rubbish affect display. Like, you see that even the ISTP, like that does not care.
Yeah.
And like you got the FE, and it's like the other two, like ISTJ and like me. But there's a wrinkle though, and it shows how important temperament is. ISTJ is a guardian, like really low FE, but the guardian wants to belong. So you have an ISTJ still wants to belong. It's just that they're not very good at expressing their feelings. So the bit about when I want to sort of like, dare I say it?
I've got to wrap up here.
Okay, she's got to wrap up, folks. So this will be the last bit. Christen, your thoughts on this? That chunk in red.
In red, okay. Let me get my.
Yeah, this is all about
here.
About whether in your case, I think TI should be 4th rather than 8th. Although I do understand why I think maybe people overrate their tertiary. Like if people are rating themselves, they're going to usually rate their tertiary over, because people like their tertiary function.
Yeah. Yeah. With you saying that slot 8 is low information and low motivation, that fits NI for me. And even earlier when we were talking about NI and TI and if they should be there or not, TI is more accessible for me than NI. I'm not sure how accessible NI is for me at all.
But what I can say is in terms of information for so for example, I think you've demonstrated the intellectual capacity to understand TI stuff. It's not a barrier for you. You have lower energy for TI because you're looking for the practical application. But you've shown an ability to, like, you can understand. So it's like if you're comparing, say, ESTJ and ESFP, I'm like, well, ESTJ has more ability to understand TI than ESFP. So, and then it's like,
and I think ESFP can NI better more readily than I can. They can do it, and I think they do it. I think both of the extroverted artisans, I think, do it maybe more than they realize.
How do you think that? I mean, I personally see an example of it is in their ability to gamble, to take a risk on a hunch, and maybe that could be sort of tactical use of NI.
Yeah, there's something in some of the extroverted artisans that I've known, so ESFPs and ESTPs, that it's like they'll mention something they want to do, like some passion or some goal, and they're seemingly doing nothing in their life towards it. And for years, too, I think they actually don't do anything towards it. But there are somehow all these, like what appear to me, haphazard things they do where maybe a decade later, it's like, oh my gosh, they got there. And I think there was some under thread or current of NI happening that they may or may not have even been aware of.
Especially in the sort of like the high achieving SE DOMs. Say when you can see it when you look at, say, a certain star, and it's like you've seen that this person has had a drive to like perfect their craft and put a lot of effort into it, and all of the stuff that they've done to achieve their goal. And once they've achieved their goal and they don't have a goal in, like, then they can sort of go into the stereotypical substance abuse stuff because they're looking for something to fill that hole. And it's like they've reached the top of the mountain. What now? I've had the Oscar. What do I do now? Besides slap the host. Making an impact.
I think you've got a case here that to switch that 4th and 8th function.
Yeah, and also, but I think that the most convincing argument is just Dario's data. And it's like, and so I always interpreted Victor's model like that the information and the energy, that was the big difference. But But recently, Model G is being taught and understood by, and so I had a bit of a falling out with some other Model G people who were basically saying, no, FI is the weakest function in ENFJ. And I'm like, what? And remember, we started this series of videos, didn't we, Christen, where we compared it. We did FI and INTJ versus FI and ENFJ, which is worse.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on. ENFJ is an NF. Their FI is not terrible.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So I better wind.
They can do that. They have that. Some FI is defined as empathy, like being able to see, being able to identify, not just identify others' feelings, but to be able to actually recognize in themselves what it feels like to go through something.
Oh, yeah. You can sort of finish on that. Wait a minute. FE, FI. Yeah. I mean, to me, the reason why one of the reasons I put empathy in there, as I put it up there, EXTP is bad at all of these. And as I said about Douglas Adams, like someone criticized him for writing a character that was a bit one-dimensional and stereotypical. And he said Arthur Dent was a bit. So Melvin Bragg said to Douglas Adams, Arthur Dent's a bit of a stereotype, isn't he? And he says, oh, yes, of course. I'm not interested in characters. I'm interested in ideas. He literally came out and said that. I was like, okay, you're ENTP.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm become obsessed about characterization. But yeah, I mean, I think
and you've got to too, if you want people, with the to be able to relate to your story, and that is what gets people into a story, a TV series, is that they can identify with the characters. Then you, as the writer creator, have to be able to identify with the characters. That is why people get into shows and movies, is because there's an identifying factor, a connectedness that they're personally experiencing. And you've got to be able to tap into other mindsets the way that I know you're doing to be able to create a good storyline like that.
Yeah, let's see if you like Londo in Babylon 5. So let's wind it down, folks, because Kristen's got to go. Yep. So hopefully she starts watching Babylon 5 and she lets me know what she thinks of it. So yeah, so if you look on Netflix, they have the pilot. The pilot is called The Gathering. The pilot is very slow, but it does set up little bits, then it gets better. Especially from the second episode of the series. But the pilot was a little bit slow, and it didn't have great music, and some good music was added. Afterwards, I'll press end broadcast because I feel I'm being supervised. Right, so bye-bye, folks.